Good
morning.
Morning. কানেকশন কাজ করছে তো ফাইন। আমি জাস্ট চেক করতে চাই আমাদের শুরু হবার আগে আমার স্লাইড গুলো কাজ করছে কিনা। হ্যাঁ, আমি এবার টুক করে শেয়ার করব, করে দেখছি। দাঁড়াও।
ঠিক আছে।
আমার পাওয়ার পয়েন্টটা দেখা যাচ্ছে? এবার স্লাইড মুভ করছে কিনা দেখা যাক। স্লাইড মুভ করছে?
হ্যাঁ, স্লাইড মুভ করছে।
থ্যাংক ইউ। অনেক সময় হয় কি ফুল স্ক্রিন শেয়ার করতে হয় এটসেট্রা।
হ্যাঁ, ঠিক আছে।
সাউন্ড কাজ করছে?
সুমন চ্যাটার্জি তো আসেনি।
Very good morning to all the respected professors, speakers, and all the participants present here today. And so I would like to welcome all you in this webinar titled National Seminar on Recent Advances in Astrophysics and Cosmology, organized by ICAT, Department of Physics, North Bengal University. Our invited speakers for today are Professor Somak Roy Chaudhary, Ayuka Pune, Professor Kanak Shah, Ayuka Pune, Professor Farooq Rahman, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and Dr. Rajiv Kul Sheikh, IIT Kanpur. So without making further delay, I would like to request our head, Department of Physics, Dr. Suman Chatterjee, to address this webinar. Suman Chatterjee.
Professor Chatterjee. He has joined.
দেখা দরকার নেই, দেখা দরকার নেই। হ্যাঁ, এখানে ওখানে হচ্ছে না, এখানে হচ্ছে না। হয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, পিন করে দেন উপরে, যেন আপনারটা এই যে ইউ পিন। ও পিন 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 এটা করে দিন। কি বলবো না? হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, good evening viewers, good morning. This is a program of ICARD IUCA from the physics department of North Bengal University. Welcome you all participants in the program. Good morning viewers. Here in physics department we have ICARD IUCA Center. The seminar is organized on behalf of the ICARD. Welcome you all in the program. Thank you, and let's start the program.
Okay, thank you, Suman sir. Next, I would like to request Professor Samak Rohit Chaudhary, Director of IUCA Pune, to address this webinar.
Good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here at the inaugural session of this workshop organized by the ICARD in North Bengal University. As you know, I mean, I here work in IUCA in Pune, and IUCA is more than 30 years old now, and it was established in the 1980s to make sure that this new subject of astrophysics is taught at universities all over India, and also that the university and college faculty get active in astrophysics research. In 1980s, when IUCA was set up, very few universities in the country actually had astrophysics in their curriculum, also in their research. I'm happy to say that North Bengal University has been there from the very beginning. In fact, even in the 1980s, quite a lot of very interesting work in relativity and cosmology was going on. And Professor Shoila Mukherjee, of course, was involved in the earliest activities of IUCA. And when IUCA formed centers all over the country, North Bengal University was one of the first to actually have a center of IUCA. So you have been there from the very beginning, and in the new form of ICARD, I think it is playing a very important role. Over the last 30 years, the nature of university education has changed in India. The rigid system of honors pass and few subjects, restriction on subjects, etc., is now being completely changed, has changed for a while in the last few years, but now with the national education policy, it will be completely changed. And so this also makes it very interesting for these new subjects to come in various different ways. North Bengal University was one of the first places where in the master's program, astrophysics was introduced in physics as special papers. But now one can teach astrophysics as a 4-credit course, even in the undergraduate program, in engineering colleges, in mathematics departments, in statistics departments, in biology, chemistry departments. So this opens up an opportunity of bringing in astrophysics in different forms in college education. And so it it is important for us to have workshops like this, research workshops, to show people in various departments, in various colleges and universities, that they can do research in astronomy, astrophysics. Even if they are not from a physics background, they can be from mathematics background, from engineering background, chemistry, statistics background, things like that. Also, there are opportunities of teaching and learning the subject, which is a very interdisciplinary subject. And you will see today and tomorrow in the different talks how interdisciplinary this subject is, because it involves a lot of interesting things. Okay, so I will hand over back to the others to start this program off. I'm very happy that today's program is starting off with a very interesting set of talks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Somak Rai Chaudhuri, for such a nice speech. Next, I would like to request the coordinator, ICAR, Department of Physics, University of North Bengal, Professor Vikas Chandra Paul, to address the webinar.
A very good morning to you all. Honorable Professor Somak Rai Chaudhuri, Director of IUCA Pune, my dear faculties of this Physics Department, North Bengal University, HOD Professor Sumon Chatterjee, other faculty members, my dear research scholars, students and faculties of other universities, research scholars of other universities. Today we are organizing a webinar with people from various institutes and universities. We are lucky that we have today with Professor Somak Rai Chaudhuri and Dr. Konok Saha will deliver their talk. Professor Somak Rai Chaudhuri is plenary speaker, and I think the seminar will be very much useful and encouraging. Now, I will tell a few words about our ICAR. As already Professor Somak Rai Chaudhuri mentioned you, IUCA Center for Astronomy Research and Development, that is in short ICAR, is one of the leading center in North Bengal to promote the teaching and research in astronomy, astrophysics and cosmology. Although ICAR started its journey from 2018, earlier it was known as IRC, IUCA Reference Center, during 1999 to 2018. In the meantime, there is one more change, that is IUCA Resource Center, but it was IRC. Earlier it was IUCA Reference Center, then it is changed to IUCA Resource Center. Now it is changed to ICAR. We are one of the 5 centers in India that time. The objective of ICAR is to promote astronomy and astrophysics under the leadership of Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, situated in Pune, a national institute funded by University Grants Commission. It has a vibrant visiting program supported by IUCA, and faculties are engaged in teaching and research. It organized our ICAR or IRC organized IUCA sponsored seminar, conference, school, invited talk at North Bengal University with the help of IUCA, which helped a lot of progress and to disseminate knowledge from the eminent scientists in the area. We have nucleated a number of collaboration in this regard while visiting IUCA or while visiting people visiting our university. And also in the meantime, those who are participating the IUCA sponsored seminar organized at IUCA or at ICAR. So it is one way, is very important for all of us in academic area, in terms of academics as well as research. In the present COVID-19 situation, pandemic situation, ICARD organized a first webinar last year. This is the second in its kind, and this is a national seminar on recent advances in astrophysics and cosmology. As total number of participants in this program crossed 100, we are unable to accommodate all of them in the Google Meet link. And that's why we also arranged for live YouTube and provided YouTube link to all those participants who are not accommodated in the Google link. So we have today around 250 participants. We have with us today, as I mentioned already, Professor Somok Raichaudhuri, plenary speaker, Dr. Konok Shaha from IUCA, Pune, who is a very famous astrophysicist, Farooq Rahman from Jadavpur University Mathematics Department, and Dr. Rajibul Sheikh from IIT Kanpur. And yesterday, Professor S.G. Ghosh from Jamia Millia Central University gave a talk to us, as he is not in a position to give his talk on 24th or 25th. That's why we want to know from him, and we have organized a seminar talk yesterday. So I thank him, and I also take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to all who accepted our invitation in this seminar. So we are thankful to IUCA, other universities, and the institutes who came here to participate in the seminar. I hope that from this seminar we can get a very useful conversation, and something may come out in the right direction. Thank you all in this seminar. I welcome you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vikas Chandrapal, for such a nice talk. Next, I would like to request BCP sir to take further proceedings to say session 1 for session 1.
Okay. Next session will be from 11:30. So Professor Raichaudhuri, when you want to start, it is up to you.
No, you tell me. I mean, I'm ready to start. Do you think? I mean, we can start now if you want.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, or
all the participants are here.
If all the participants are here, I can start.
Okay.
And has Konok Shaha joined already? Is he there? I mean, otherwise, well, we'll see how we can.
Yes, no, Konok Shaha. Yes, Konok Shaha.
Konok is there. Good.
Yes, Konok is
there. So I don't. So we are starting a little early, and I don't know how long this will take, and maybe there will be questions. So his talk might be a little early too. Is that all right? Shall we start?
Yes, it is okay.
Okay, so let me again welcome to everybody. Good morning. Let me just share my slides. Okay. Can my slides be seen?
Yes, visible.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for asking me to start this off. I think it's a very important workshop. Please, if any time, because I cannot see in this particular view everybody else, if you feel that my voice has dropped or my picture has dropped, Please, somebody speak up, otherwise I will not know. It has happened before that I've gone on talking without knowing that there's nobody out there. This is a problem with this way of interacting. But thank you very much for coming. This pandemic has shown us a lot of very interesting things, and even though it has restricted our travel, it has made this participation through this medium much wider. And we are finding, for example, that our participation in our summer schools and lectures, etc., has increased by a factor of sometimes 4, 5, even 10. And this is very good to for us to go and reach out to many more people than would normally be able to come to a meeting like this. But it has its disadvantages, that is, the human touch is not there. So we'll see how we can get around it. I hope this workshop will be a great success in bringing together quite a lot of diverse views in astrophysics. Lovely menu of talks. I'm going to talk about some of the work that I've been doing for for the last 2 decades on the evolution of galaxies in groups and clusters. This is very different from some of the talks in this workshop. But let's look at these galaxies and how they interact with the environment. People who I've worked with to produce these results are, you would see some work from Ruchika Seth, who's just finished as a PhD student in IUCAA. Right now, she's just defended and is on way to her postdoctoral position in astrophysics. Smriti Mahajan, who was my student in my previous job in England, and now is Inspire faculty in ISER Mohali. And Mahadev Pandey, who works with me, who's both Smriti and Mahadev are IUCAA associates, and they are parts of other iCards. Mahadev is at this Latur Science College, and I have got several other collaborators whose work has been represented here. And here's a good example of what I'm talking about today, a small group of galaxies in which you see the X-ray data in color. Superposed on it is the radio GMRT observation of the same group of galaxies. And one of the persistent themes in this talk will be that what has happened in the last few decades, which has made astrophysics a subject more in physics rather than in astronomy, which is to do with basic trigonometry and positions and things like that, is that we can look all over the electromagnetic spectrum and now, of course, in the gravitational wave spectrum, and look at the same things in different parts of the spectrum, in X-rays, in gamma rays, in radio, infrared, optical, and thus get a view of various astronomical sources, which we couldn't do before. I mean, if you just look at this particular picture, or even the pictures in the previous slide, these are all similar observations where the color observation comes from an X-ray observation, in this case, all from the Chandra satellite. And on the contours all represent low frequency radio observations from GMRT here in Pune. And you can see that these two are quite outside the traditional astronomical view, which for thousands of years has been using our eyes to look at the sky. X-rays don't reach the Earth, so you have to send a telescope up in space. And so these are from Chandra, and I'll mention AstroSat at the end, which is the Indian version. And then radio observations. And these have together tell us about galaxies in ways we have never seen before. And after this, you will hear from my colleague, Professor Kanak Shah, how ultraviolet observations, which is also from space, from AstroSat, is actually changing our view of how galaxies evolve and galaxies work. So both these talks are about galaxy evolution. And I'll concentrate more on the environment, because by looking at the multi-wavelength picture, you can see how environment matters. Just to start off by saying that the universe is made up of galaxies, and these are the basic building blocks of the universe. About 20% of all galaxies are elliptical, about 70–75% are disk galaxies, spiral galaxies that have different forms. You can see spiral arms and star formation lining these arms. Galaxies are known to interact with each other, and they exist mostly in small groups. The universe on the whole, the large-scale structure, is a network of filaments, galaxies. Then, as we know, and this we've learned only in the last 20, 25, 30 years, in fact, we've learned that the galaxies make up the universe for less than 100 years. And in the last 20, 25 years, even I would say after I was a PhD student, this kind of knowledge came to us, that the universe is, matter is distributed in the universe in a filamentary form with these large structures and galaxies. And this is, of course, a simulation where you see a dark matter simulation. There are large voids in this distribution. There's filaments, and galaxies form on the filaments. And at the crossroads of the filaments, you find these large clusters. This is observation. This is simulation. This is observation. And you can see they're pretty similar. Observation here in this particular plot, this is a slice through the three-dimensional distribution of galaxies, nearby galaxies. There are more than 1 million galaxies in this picture. Each galaxy is a dot. This is a dark matter simulation, so there are no galaxies in here, but we think that galaxies actually reside in these dark matter halos. So dark matter forms large halos around galaxies. But galaxies are, the part of galaxies we see in optical light are those that have stars. And here they are. And it's interesting to see that galaxies are distributed in the same way that the dark matter is distributed. And also you can see the large scale picture. So my question today is how all this is affected by the galaxy evolution, the evolution of galaxies, the way we see it now, even our galaxy. How is it affected by the large-scale distribution of matter? How is it affected by where the galaxy is in this large-scale distribution? And eventually, I will mention, but not go into great detail, about research that's going on about how the galaxies themselves affect this distribution and affect their immediate surroundings. So both are very important, and we can see that from these simulations, this is from the Millennium simulations, but the newer simulations are even more complex, and you can see that this is the evolution, and this is, as you can see, redshift of about 6, redshift of about 1, redshift now. These are 3 time snapshots from the Millennium simulation of dark matter. And on the same scale, this is about 200 megaparsecs across, or slightly more. And you can see how the universe gets more and more clumpy, and clusters like this form. Whereas, at a redshift of 6, for example, the clustering was minimal. And so as the universe moves, and this is a very interesting part of the universe at redshift of 1 to 2, you will see why in a moment. And of course, in Professor Shah's talk after me, you will see even more how interesting that redshift range is. And this is when galaxies start forming most of their stars and start being visible. And as the galaxies form stars, they start affecting their surroundings as well. And the clusters and groups around them are also affected by the activity of star formation, and then eventually of the activity of the supermassive black holes in the galaxies in the form of AGN. And that is why this multi-wavelength view is very important. You can look at galaxies in the optical, you can see all the galaxies there, but as soon as you start looking at the radio on the left and the X-ray observations on the right, you start seeing other components which are interesting. And galaxies exist in all these different environments. So you have galaxies, as I showed you in that large-scale picture, in very rich clusters. The very rich clusters are at the crossroads of those filaments. Most galaxies, maybe 70 to 80% of galaxies, are actually in small groups. Our own galaxy is in a group of 2 major galaxies with lots of tiny galaxies around them. This is a picture of Stephan's quintet, which actually has 4 galaxies. And this is the commonest environment. And these galaxies exist in these small groups. Groups tend to merge, as you can see in this simulation, into larger groups and then form these big clusters. And this is happening in the last half of the age of the universe, from a redshift of around 1 to 2 till now. And this is why it's very fascinating to study nearby galaxies and how they evolve. And this access to multi-wavelength facilities, to radio and X-rays and infrared and ultraviolet, they have opened up very, very interesting windows to study these different components. So I'll talk about 2 aspects of this kind of evolution and their connection to large-scale structure today. So where does this star formation occur in galaxies? You can see that these are dark matter halos. But if you look at the galaxies themselves, you can see star formation happens in H2 regions, which line the spiral structure in these galaxies. So in the disk of the spiral galaxies, there's star formation, regular star formation. Our galaxy, for example, has the spiral arms and star formation happening. We wouldn't call our galaxy a hugely star-forming galaxy. It's a normal galaxy with 1 solar mass per year star formation, but it's all happening localized in H2 regions. But interestingly, if you look at where star formation is happening in the current universe, they're mostly happening in dwarf galaxies. And that is because there's a lot of tidal interaction between the dwarf galaxies and their nearby giant galaxies. So here's a fascinating plot from Chris Haynes' work from SDSS, early version of SDSS, where if you look at the local galaxy density on the x-axis, so you take a galaxy and look at the density around it. So high density means that that's in a cluster. Very low density means that it's away in a cluster, away on the filaments, maybe in a void. So, if you look at then, you can see that in general, what happens is that as the, and the y-axis is passive galaxy fraction, which means that the galaxies that are not really forming any stars, passive galaxies are elliptical galaxies or galaxies that have very low star formation. So high passive galaxy fraction means that not much star formation is happening. And I'm asking the question, where are stars being formed and why is star formation being stopped? This is one of the things that we're asking. You can see that when the galaxy density is very high locally, which means clusters, then the passive galaxy fraction is very high. We know this. Elliptical galaxies are mostly in clusters. And here, the local galaxy density, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, the local galaxy density is very low, which means this is the kind of the virial radius of clusters. And then you go outside, and this is where the groups are, and this is where the general field is. And the different colors here are different mass galaxies, right? So the dark ones are those that have the lowest mass, and the highest mass galaxies are up there in the reds. So the interesting takeaway from this plot is that in the field, even in the field where the density, the local density is the lowest, dwarf galaxies are forming stars everywhere. Dwarf galaxies don't care where they are, right? And the interesting thing is that the giant galaxies, like our galaxy, have very low star formation, and particularly in the clusters. So dwarf galaxies, interesting to know, is forming stars, and they are the ones that actually have most of the star formation in the current universe. You can see that. These are nearby dwarf galaxies. Some of them are very near our galaxy, and these are satellites of nearby galaxies. And just looking at the optical picture, these are negative pictures. So black is bright in optical light. You can see there's star formation happening everywhere in these dwarf galaxies. And some of them are amazingly bright in star formation. They are called starburst galaxies. So this is a very famous starburst galaxy called M82, which is actually a dwarf galaxy that is a satellite of a nearby galaxy called M81. And here, what are you seeing? You're seeing the optical picture of the galaxy taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. That's the yellow-blue bit. And then superposed on it is a picture taken with a narrowband H-alpha filter that shows only the H-alpha line. The H-alpha line that is significant, the H-alpha line emission that signifies current star formation. And that is the narrowband filter of the same galaxy. So you can see that there's a huge amount of star formation going on. Not only is it going on in this galaxy, but there's a lot of H-alpha gas being ejected from the galaxy itself, the disk of the galaxy, into the surroundings. Starburst galaxies are like this. This is a very extreme example. But the fascinating thing is this kind of the gas that's ejected from the disk of the galaxy comes from a large population of supernovae. And the supernovae come from a very high rate of star formation that's happening now. And what happens is that in a star-forming population, there are very massive stars, and then there are normal stars. The massive stars evolve very fast and go supernova. And so in a star-forming population, there's quite a large number of supernovae. And so you can get this. So you can see what very highly forming stars, galaxy with a high star formation rate looks like. And in the current universe, a lot of the dwarf galaxies are doing this. So my question here today is, what causes this, and what stops the star formation in the giant galaxies? Our galaxy is not forming that many stars. The elliptic galaxies are not forming stars at all. One of the things also that that causes the star formation are mergers of galaxies. So here is a more, I showed you a mass-dependent view of star formation. Here's a similar plot that comes from some interesting papers that have come up. Very early papers came out of the SDSS survey. And that shows that if you again take on the x-axis here, it's the local density of galaxies. And on the y-axis are different things that that talk about star formation rates. These are median star formation rate, mean star formation rate, etc., etc. You can see as you go towards here, this is increasing this way in the x-axis. As you go towards the middle of clusters, this is in density. On the right-hand side, the x-axis is talking about this. If you take clusters and stack them together, you're talking about the change from the center of a cluster, and it's in radius out from the center of the cluster. Same thing. You can see the star formation goes on in the giant galaxies, in particular, goes on decreasing towards the centers of the clusters. High density means star formation decrease. But why does it stop? It's very interesting to note this particular effect, and I'm sure Professor Kanak Shah is going to talk about this as well later on. This is a similar trend in star formation, but not with a density of galaxies, but with time. So here, the x-axis is redshift, and the y-axis is the star formation rate of a certain volume, per unit volume in the universe. All kinds of galaxies put together. I'm not distinguishing like here between giant and dwarf galaxies. And this has been known for a long time now, and it has many, many different names. Sometimes this is called the Maddow plot, and sometimes it is, there are other people who worked on it. Here are different indicators of star formation. All of them say the same thing. From UV, from H-alpha, I showed you evidence of how H-alpha emission gives you some evidence of star formation, etc., etc. And if you look at the trend that comes from very high redshift, star formation was at its highest between the redshift of 1 and 2. And this is also the kind of epoch that Kanak is going to talk about. But from then till now, the star formation has dropped drastically. And this is interesting to note, that in this evolution of galaxies, one of the major things that you look at is how many stars are being formed. Less and less stars are being formed now, a huge factor. This is a log scale, it's a factor of 2.5. And so the question is, why does this happen? We saw that it is a function of density, local density in clusters. Star formation drops. And also we know that as the universe evolves, the large-scale structure evolves, more and more rich clusters form. But is that the whole story? I mean, in the 70s and 80s, when first this kind of effect was seen, and at the same time people were looking at the clustering and the evolution of clustering in the universe, people at first thought that that's what's happening. What is happening as the structure gets more and more clustered, more and more galaxies are ending up in clusters, and so their star formation is being quenched, because for reasons I'm going to talk about. Is that the whole story? The answer is, it is now turning out, as you look in great detail as to what happens in clusters and groups, and we've only started looking at it in the last 20, 30 years, the picture is far more interesting and far more complicated than that, right? There are clusters in which there's a lot of star formation going on. There are larger structures in which star formation stops and things like that. And so there's a lot of very interesting physics that goes into this modulation of star formation in the universe. If you look at galaxy clusters, people normally think clusters are full of these large elliptical galaxies, and this is where all galaxies come to die. The question is, what happens in the process of galaxy formation to when they end up in this dead state? There are two different ways that you can look at this evolution of star formation. And just like in human behavior or in psychology, there are these terms that are used, nature and nurture. And for example, is this nature, which means, is this isolated effect that galaxies age and their star formation, they use up all their gas, etc., and then their star formation slowly dies? Or is it nurtured, which means that that the environment plays a very important role? Just like in human behavior, you can think about whether the environment plays a very important role in how we grow up and turn into the people we are. Very similarly, you can think about whether the history of a galaxy and if it belongs to groups and then clusters, or if it's isolated, the star formation history different and things like that. And as more and more we are looking at the observational large surveys, we can actually look at all these effects. And as you know, I mean, this started long time ago in the 1980s. Dressler showed, for example, that in clusters, so these are the three different color codes are elliptical galaxies, lenticular galaxies, and spiral galaxies. You could see that in clusters there were very few spiral galaxies, but much more elliptical galaxies and things like that. Just looking at the morphology, what he did was he took pictures of the sky and counted galaxies, and then looked at whether they looked like elliptical or spiral. Now you can do so much more because you have so much information about the galaxies themselves, taken with many filters. So yeah, so this is so my point in this whole in this talk today is that we should not look at the extreme populations, the clusters themselves, because it turns out very few galaxies are in clusters if you look at the whole population of clusters. We should look at what's happening on the way as galaxies form out on the filaments, the large-scale cosmic filaments, and at the end, some of them end up in clusters. But the answer to how star formation in the universe happens and galaxies evolve are in the groups. An analogy again with humans would be, for example, as we study history, we study what kings and queens have done and what wars have happened and things like that. But the current approach to look at over time. And if, for example, clusters contain only 5% of galaxies in the universe and people concentrate only on clusters to look at how galaxies evolve, then you're missing out on most of the galaxies in the universe. And most of the galaxies are in small groups, just like humans are in small families. And we have to look at these systems. The problem is that groups are very difficult to study, and so people have not done it till now. And we've only started looking at how galaxies interact with only the neighboring galaxies, not in large clusters, not in large systems, but only the neighboring galaxies, only in small systems. So let's look at some examples here. Galaxies actually spend most of their life in the group environment. This is what I wanted to. So it's not these huge systems that we looked at, like the Coma cluster or whatever, but they are in. If you look at this dark matter simulation, these tiny systems, if you look at them, there are a few galaxies in there, and what happens is that in the small systems, as opposed to large systems, if you look at groups, then because they are in a small dark matter halo, the velocity dispersion is low. Velocity dispersion scales as mass. Velocity dispersion squared is proportional to mass. Velocity dispersion low means that these galaxies that are in this, say, dark matter halo are moving very slowly with respect to each other. And as a result, dynamical friction is very high. Dynamical friction goes as 1 over v squared, as Chandrasekhar showed us. So as the interaction between galaxies is much, much higher as a result of dynamical friction. And so galaxies get a lot of time to interact with each other. In very rich systems like clusters, they're whizzing past each other. Their relative velocities are very high due to high velocity dispersion. And as a result, they don't get time to interact as much with each other as in small groups. And this is where galaxies evolve the most. So this is very, very interesting. And so most of the stellar populations are put in place in galaxies. Most of the star formation, etc., happens. A galaxy gets its character and its definition of what it is out there on the filaments in small groups before they reach a cluster. Okay? And till now, most of the people have studied galaxies in clusters because you get a lot of them there and it's easier to study. Yeah. So I'll come back to this in a minute. I show this graph a lot, and this comes from. Please don't pay any attention to a lot of the text here. It's a very complicated graph. I'll just show you what this left-hand graph is showing. Very interesting. You take a large three-dimensional map of galaxies. This comes from the 2DF survey, very old survey. And you ask the question, for each galaxy, what is the size of the group or cluster it belongs to, right? And here, these are plotted in solar luminosities. This is log solar luminosity in the x-axis, and this is a fraction. And this particular histogram tells us that most of the galaxies are in groups that are this size. And this is exactly the size of our local group, which is 2 or 3 galaxies, or 4 galaxies together. Rich clusters are out here. And you can see that less than 5% of all galaxies in the universe are in such systems, right? So this is why I tell you, I just told you that you have to study galaxies that are in small groups, and because most of the galaxies are here, this is the common people. These are the kings and queens. These are the common people. So the history of galaxies belongs here in small groups. So that is another thing. All clusters look the same, but if you because they are they're often thermalized systems with lots and lots of galaxies. Groups are now forming, so you can see galaxies. I can actually see evidence of galaxies interacting with each other. This is the Stephan's quintet picture I showed you, a Hubble Space Telescope picture, together with an X-ray Chandra image superposed on it. So this is hot gas resulting from galaxies colliding with each other. So you can see actually evidence of interaction going on. And here also contours of X-ray gas superposed on the galaxies, and you can see how complicated these things are. It's very rewarding to study them, but it's very complicated to study them. And you really have to find out more about the groups by studying them all across the electromagnetic spectrum. So ultraviolet and X-rays and radio observations give you some information that just the optical pictures can't give you. This is why it is new, because you need space telescopes, and space telescopes are new. There were no satellites 50 years ago. So this is why this is a new subject. And even in my introduction, I said astrophysics is a very new subject. And it's very interesting to bring all these people together. So the people who build these X-ray telescopes and the detectors come from high energy physics. People who build the radio telescopes come from electronics. People who study them and put these together have a background in physics. And so it's very interesting to see how multidisciplinary this subject is. So I'll just look at recent work done by my PhD student, Ruchika, where we looked at how the large-scale structures and the small-scale structures all contribute to looking at galaxy evolution, right? So here is what is known as the Coma supercluster, which is just a very nearby system. You saw that filamentary structure. This is one section of that filamentary structure, and very nearby. It's only about 100 megaparsecs away from us. Are 2 big clusters. This is the Coma cluster. I showed you a picture of that. This is Abell 1367. And they're connected by, and what you see, all the dots are galaxies. This is from the Sloan survey. And you can see that all the galaxies, you can see that there are these 2 clusters, and they're connected by filament of galaxies, very similar to the filamentary structure I showed you. And all these little circles are small groups of galaxies in the same region. There are tiny groups and there are big groups. And even along this filament, you can see small groups and big groups, all that, right? So interestingly, this Coma cluster is just full of galaxies that are early type elliptical galaxies with no star formation at all. About 85% of all galaxies in coma are elliptical galaxies with absolutely no neutral hydrogen or star formation going on. 3067 is different, but there are all these groups on here. So one of the things that I asked Ruchika to do, and this was her thesis concentrated on, was to find out if you take a galaxy in this particular system, which has all kinds of environments. It has very rich environment, it has group environment, it has away from groups. How do the galaxy properties, particularly the star formation properties, differ between an environment that is not so dense and galaxies that are in groups and galaxies that are in clusters, right? So, and you can do that now because of the Sloan survey, you have a whole range of environments that you can look at. You can look at small scale environment, large scale environment, because it gives you millions of galaxies in a very large redshift range, and this is only a very nearby cluster. So one of the ways to do this is to find out, for example, some way of quantifying the local environment by smoothing. So in this particular case, what we did was we used a kernel density estimator, which is has a smoothing algorithm to get rid of the shock noise, the Poisson noise, and make sure that we used a smooth estimator of local density of galaxies. And then one of the results she found, and I'm just showing one, in that somehow the y-axis and x-axis have vanished, but I don't know why. Anyway, I'll just tell you what this is. If you look at the different environments, this is the highest density environment. So we broke this up into 5 different environments. The highest density, the ones that are slightly lower than that, etc., etc. And then the 5th class is the least dense environment, which is out there. And you can see the contours showing the 5 different levels of galaxy density. And this is the highest environment, and this is the lowest environment. And this y-axis, which you can't see for some strange reason, is the formation, the star-forming fraction of galaxies. And you can see there's a huge difference, not just with the, I mean, in the previous plots that I showed you how people had plotted galaxies as a function of the local density. Here we've broken them up with galaxies that are in groups, which we can see, and not in groups. So that's an additional parameter, which wasn't there in the other work that other people did. And we are showing in this particular paper and in Ruchika's thesis that just the local density is not the whole story. Because if you look at these groups, some of these groups have local density that is the same as, say, the outskirts of these clusters. They can have the same density. But if galaxies are in groups, they have a different profile of star formation than those that are not in groups. Generally, those that are not in groups have higher levels of star formation right across. And those that are in groups seem to have lower star formation. And also, the groups that are in the outskirts of clusters seem to have a higher star formation rate. So they're very different. So the take home from this is that the groups themselves provide an additional description of environment over and above local galaxy density. And this means that it is important to consider whether a galaxy is part of a dark matter halo, a small dark matter halo, which is a group itself, right? And you can do various things. You can break these up into, now you can see the y-axis and the x-axis. You can break this up into bright galaxies and faint galaxies, dwarf galaxies and giant galaxies. and you can see big differences between them in both the non-group galaxies and the group galaxies. So the take home from this is that it matters whether you're part of a small group, even if you're part of a very large structure, which is a big filament or a supercluster. If you are on the outskirts of clusters like this here, a group here on the outskirts of a cluster, a galaxy belonging to a group here would be different from a galaxy belonging to a group here, right? And you look at the combination of the local density of the group, the surroundings of the group, and the fact that you're part of a group, both play an important role. And so we're trying to understand why. And one of the reasons I told you is that in small groups, there's a lot of interaction between the galaxies themselves because of their very low velocity dispersion. And that can act as a way of either suppressing or enhancing star formation. Similarly, the very interesting things is that if you look at this whole environment, Abel 1367, which is this cluster, and the Coma cluster are very different clusters. Here we have a cluster that has more than 50% spiral galaxies. Coma cluster, less than 20% are spiral galaxies. And and they're part of the same system. You can ask the question, why does this happen? And you can see that Coma cluster is surrounded by very few groups. And very few galaxies seem to be falling in to the Coma cluster. Whereas this particular system seems to have a lot of large groups coming together. So we can see just by looking at this kind of formation of groups and galaxies and their star-forming properties that a large number of these are forming together. So this is a cluster that is forming now. This is a cluster which formed a long time ago and has been there for a long time. So there's an age difference between them. And so here we have a lot of new galaxies, young galaxies still forming stars, and they're coming together now. So it's fascinating to study the two side by side and looking at their properties and the properties of the galaxies in them. So this kind of study is only now beginning. Not many people have done this before. So you can actually in detail study the cluster itself, but also the groups that are now falling into this cluster to form this structure. And remember the movie I showed you, where the structure forms hierarchically. Small groups merge into larger clusters. So this is a very intriguing start to a subject, I think. And I've had a bunch of PhD students. One of the plots I showed you comes from Smriti Mahajan's work, who worked with me before this, and other people who've actually looked at the connection between these the star formation in galaxies and their immediate environment and also large-scale environment. I'll skip because I'm running out of time. I'll skip over a lot of these, but this paper is out. You can, in monthly notices, you can read it if you want. But I'm going to talk about, go back to the Coma cluster, which is, again, that cluster I talked about. I just kept the context the same and talk about just the reverse. What happens when you have galaxies in these clusters? Are they affected by their environment only, or do they affect the environment itself? And it turns out it works both ways. Galaxies regulate the environment as well. And this is the process of feedback that is now a very hot topic everywhere. You can look at this part of the optical, and this is part of the picture. Is the Coma cluster has two big ellipticals in the middle. This is what the X-ray hot gas, the thermal Bremsstrahlung emitted by the hot gas, 10 to the power 7 degrees hot gas, shows up in the X-rays. In a lot of clusters, you find that if you look at this hot gas that is in the X-ray emitting hot gas, this is the smooth hot gas in between the galaxies, right? This is from ROSAT, which is a very low resolution X-ray satellite that went up in the 1990s. You can see So these are the two ellipticals here, right? You can see one of the ellipticals has the hot gas centered around it. This is that, and the second one is there, but it's smooth all around. Now, if you look at the distribution of temperature of this gas, you see that in the middle, it drops, and this is called a cooling flow. Most clusters are what is known as cool core clusters, which means that the galaxies should be cooler in the middle. And this comes from normal hydrostatic equilibrium that we study in astrophysics, that if you take a gas and it's in gravitational equilibrium, then what will happen is that its density will be much more towards the middle than towards the edges. Thermal Bremsstrahlung, which causes the X-ray emission, the rate of thermal Bremsstrahlung is proportional to the square of the density and squared t to the power half. And as a result, the middle will cool much faster because it's radiating, and so the middle will be colder. So this, when I was a PhD student, we talked about this all the time, and Andy Fabian first started looking at a lot of these clusters. This was the Perseus cluster, was a very famous example, where it was shown very nicely that that's what happens if you take, this is the temperature of the gas in KeV, and it nicely goes down in the middle. But when clusters were studied and the central galaxies were studied, we know that there is a supermassive black hole in the middle of the massive galaxy in the middle. And what it does, it actually, that gas, the gas falling in to the middle of the supermassive black hole, actually has a lot of activity going on. And one of the activities that goes on is that emits radio jets, and as a result, energy is transferred from the surrounding of the black hole in the accretion disk into the surrounding medium. And as these clusters were studied with the advent of high resolution, so here you had the very low resolution images in the 1990s and early 2000s, where people looked at the large scale temperature distribution in clusters, and we found that the centers of clusters were much cooler. As you looked at high resolution with the Chandra X-ray telescope, for example, and XMM and others, then you started studying the centers. We found that in the centers, these are the X-ray spectra of the centers of galaxies. And what would happen is that in the middle, as the galaxies, as the gas cools in the middle, it's expected to form stars. And there was no star formation seen in the middle. And there was absolutely no activity other than that, except for the fact that we found that for most of the clusters, more than half of the clusters, the central bits were not cool at all. There was an extra heat being generated in the middle of the clusters. And so people, this was about 15 years ago, one of the hottest subjects when people started looking at what is the reason why all clusters don't behave as you expect them to, which means that they are not cool core at all. And I'll just, in the last 5 or 10 minutes of my talk, just talk quickly about what we went through, all kinds of different explanations for why clusters are not cool in the middle. A lot of people thought it's because clusters have lots of galaxies in the middle, and so there are a lot of mergers, and the merger generates a lot of energy that prevents galaxies from being hot in the middle. It turns out, I told you, there are not too many mergers in clusters because the velocity dispersions are very high, and only a very few systems, and the amount of energy that is released by a merger is not very high. So that was ruled out. What was also ruled out was supernovae, because supernovae can release a lot of energy, but you don't see much star formation in the middle of the central galaxies in the clusters. And so that was ruled out. There was a time when, in fact, I had a PhD student who worked on this problem as well, whether conduction could be the reason. A lot of heating goes on all through the cluster, and from the outskirts of the cluster, heat can come into the middle and heat up the centers of clusters. The timescales don't work. And then finally, people realized that it's the active galactic nucleus, which is a supermassive black hole in the middle of the cluster, that is causing, which is the source of energy. And what is happening is that this energy comes out and causes the intergalactic gas to heat up in the middle of clusters. And so this is one way in which the galaxy is giving back to the environment. I told you that environment affects the clusters, the galaxies, but now the galaxies affect the environment. So let's look at how this happens. So this is now the Perseus cluster again, but in 500,000 seconds of Chandra observation. And this is done by Fabian, who first talked about the cool core clusters. He completely had to change his mind and start looking at what happens in the middle. At high resolution, the whole picture changed. And you can see so much activity going on. This is a Chandra image, very deep and high resolution Chandra image of the same Perseus cluster. And you can see a lot of activity going on. And you can see these cavities that are emerging from the center of the clusters and heating up the gas around it. Here's an extreme example of the largest system we know. Here, the red is an image of the in radio. This is from the VLA. We now have, and I'm not showing you here, we now have a very lovely GMRT image of the same cluster. And this blue part is the X-ray image. And you can see that the central galaxy is emitting these amazing, huge jets. These are about a megaparsec across, right? The entire cluster. These jets are relativistic particles that are coming out of the central supermassive black hole and heating up the gas around it. And you can see these outbursts. Now, I told you that most galaxies don't live in clusters. Does this happen in the life of all galaxies? So this is the question we are asking. We are asking, does this happen in groups as well? Because I motivated at the beginning of this talk that most galaxies live in groups. So do galaxy groups in galaxies which live in groups give back to the group in the same way as what happens in clusters? And it turns out it does. And so this is where we started using the GMRT, which is, I think, the best radio telescope in the world that can do this. And that is because it works at very low frequencies. Of course, the SKA, when it comes on, will give us a lot of very great information about this. But it turns out that if you want to see what is happening in this, so if you look at this huge cluster, this is the radio map that tells us that jets are coming out, all these particles are coming out. With high energy, you can measure the energy of these particles and to see how much energy is coming out of the galaxy that is causing the intergalactic gas to heat up. In groups, if you want to see this, you can't. Because the VLA works at frequencies that are higher than 1 gigahertz, and at those frequencies, the radio emission from groups are not seen very well because they are low density systems and the energetics of this is much lower. Once you go to low energies, you need lower frequencies to see them. Radio sources are much more bright at lower frequencies. And so in the GMRT frequencies, you can actually see these outbursts from groups. And to end this talk, I'm going to show you some wonderful examples of how we can do this. This is the Chandra X-ray Observatory. You need pictures, you need images from the Chandra Observatory as well as the GMRT Observatory. Putting them together, you get a picture. And later on, you'll see that AstroSat is doing the same thing now. I'll show you two examples. Here is a small group of galaxies called Hickson 62. There are only, you can see 3 galaxies in here, okay, which are giant, and there's lots of tiny galaxies. It's nothing like the Coma cluster, which has 1,000 galaxies, big galaxies in there. No, just 3 big galaxies. Now, if you look at the Chandra image of that, and this is, you can see these correspond to each other, put them side by side. This is the X-ray image of this particular cluster group, right? And you can see that that's the biggest galaxy, which along with the hot gases. And you can see these tiny cavities. In this particular plot that I showed you, these cavities were 200 kiloparsecs across. In Hickson 62, these cavities are 5 kiloparsecs across, very tiny ones. Now, when people did the same exercise with the VLA at high frequencies, they found a point source there, but not much else. Here are the 2 cavities, and these cavities are the gas, the hot gas that's been displaced by the jet. But you don't see the jet at the VLA. VLA 1.4 gigahertz, heavily smoothed, seem to show something. And I'll show you what the GMRT does. And this is the strength of a very large, the largest telescope in the world at low frequencies, what they can do. Here is our Chandra image of Hickson 62 again, right? You can see these 2 cavities. And as I told you, the VLA only shows a point source in there, but you don't see those jets coming out. And so for a long time, till about 2003, 2004, people were saying, maybe in groups you don't have this kind of AGN feedback. You don't see any jets coming out of these black holes. And here is our first observation, GMRT at 610 megahertz. We found the jets. We went to lower frequencies, 235. We found not only 1 jet, but 2 jets. Evidence of 2 cavities structured in the jets. So at low frequencies, you can find them. You can see the same thing happening at lower frequencies, 662. Here's another example, NGC 5044, a tiny group, small group of galaxies, one of the brightest nearby galaxy groups. Okay, here is the Chandra X-ray image. The galaxy, if you look at the optical galaxy, it is just a nice elliptical galaxy, which is this big. That's it. You see nothing. In the middle, you see lovely, and you see these images, these cavities in the X-ray image. In the VLA high resolution, the high frequency radio observations, nothing was found. No radio emission. Here's our GMRT, first GMRT 610 megahertz image. We started looking at something. If you go to lower frequencies with GMRT, started finding all this stuff. We found not only jets coming out in the direction of these, but we also found older jets that are detached from the current activity that probably, as you know, these AGN go through cycles of activity. This is a very steep spectrum radio emission that is from an older activity. So it's not just the current energy output of the black hole in the middle of the galaxy, but older ones as well. So we can quantify them and try to find out how much energy comes out of the galaxy, which heats up the gas around them and changes the nature of the group. So I'm just going to stop here and about and end by saying that we are getting into this this whole astronomy, new observational astronomy facilities by taking part and building some of these amazing instruments. Yesterday, in the first Govind Swarup Memorial Lecture on Govind Swarup's birthday, as you know, and yesterday was the first Govind Swarup Memorial Lecture which Ron Eakers gave a wonderful talk, in which he said, astronomy is a subject that progresses because of new technology. it is not a subject driven by theory. It is a subject driven by observations. You build something new and you make new observations that will give new discoveries. So GMRT has given us all these new discoveries, and we are now trying to make sense of these observations. You know that we now, India is now going into space. Astrosat has given us these amazing observations, and you'll hear some in the next talk. Also, but Astrosat also has X-ray telescopes, and it's giving us a lot of this kind of X-ray observations that are to do with clusters and groups. And the radio, the GMRT is now moving into this era of SKA, the square kilometer array, in which also India has a part. And the third thing, and that is, as you know, India is taking part in the biggest optical telescope that is being built, or one of the biggest optical telescopes that is being built, and it's a 30-meter telescope. And so we are getting into this very large era where we're taking part in building these global facilities. So this is a good time for Indian students and college and university faculty to get into this kind of astrophysics, in which you put together observational data from various different sources and try to make sense of the universe. I'll stop there and see whether people have questions before Conak's talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajudhuri, for your wonderful talk. So, questions from the audience?
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Let's look at the chat box.
Yeah. Chat box.
There isn't anything in the chat box either. If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand.
One query, just to understand ourselves. You mentioned that universe is a filamentary structure. It is a filamentary structure. So in 2D, you see that the galaxies are connected by filamentary structure. But if we think of a 3D picture, so what you will find? So is it continuation of that, or?
So if you remember, in my in one of my earlier slides, I showed you. Let me see if I can find it. Here. So I showed you how this is 2D, but here, sorry. This is a section through the 3D distribution of galaxies. This is not 2D, and there are two different sections, right? And so if you take different sections of the 2D distribution, the 3D distribution, you see these 2D maps. And this just shows that the large scale distribution is filaments and also sheets, because if you take a cut like that and you take a nearby cut and nearby cut, people have been doing these redshift surveys. Some of these filaments are like sheets, and some of them are thin filaments. So both are there. So there are essentially 1D filaments and 2D sheets that galaxies live in. And some of the largest ones are about 100 megaparsecs long. So they're fairly big.
So in this respect, I have another question. So when the Z value is increased, that means when we are looking at the farthest point, the density increases. So the nearer density less, but as you go far away from the observing point, the density increases. It is because of what?
No, the universe at high Z, the universe is also smaller, right? The universe as a whole expanding, so the local density values of energy density is higher and higher. But actually, if you look at this range that we are talking about here, we are talking about now, and most of the story that I'm talking about is between now and a redshift of 1. That is only half the age of the universe. So in that, the change of density over time is not appreciable. It's not much. Only when you start comparing with a very early universe do you start looking at real densities, the actual densities changing much. So there is not much difference between now and the kinds of redshift that we are talking about. I talked about the Coma cluster, which is very, very low density. But even the densities that Professor Kanak Shah will talk about, the variation in density of the average density of the universe is not much.
I think we have some questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Himanshu Kumar. Shall I tell?
Yeah, I can read this. Let's see. So Himanshu Kumar says, can we interpret dark matter etches the shape on which galaxies form later? And it is true. All the galaxies are formed in these halos, right? Galaxies have dark matter halos around them. The clusters and groups also have dark matter halos. So when you looked at that simulation of dark matter, what you saw were the dark matter halos of different sizes, and galaxies form in them. So for galaxies, maybe the dark matter halo has a mass that is 4 or 5 times more than the galaxy itself. For groups and clusters, the dark matter halo is probably 100 times more or 50 times more in mass than the galaxies themselves. So on large scales, the dark matter is much larger. So you're right, the dark matter halo kind of determines what kind of galaxy will form in there. And this is what I showed, if you remember, in the beginning of my talk, when I said that whether the galaxy is a dwarf galaxy or a giant galaxy, the amount of star formation going on currently, it depends on that. And it turns out in the current universe, the smaller halos are forming more stars. And the larger halos have formed stars in the past. That has already happened, right? So clearly, the dark matter halo in which the galaxy is plays an important role in the galaxy. So that is, I think, a good point. Kamal Sharkar says, is the giant molecular clouds a part of the interstellar medium where new star formation takes place, or warm clouds of neutral atomic hydrogen? So the star formation takes place in the giant molecular clouds because the molecular clouds actually collapse to form stars. Okay, the neutral atomic hydrogen does not form stars. It is the cold gas that is around star forming regions. People often look for the neutral hydrogen as a place where star formation takes place because often the neutral atomic hydrogen is associated with the molecular clouds. They are in the same region. So for example, if you look at the spiral arms of the galaxies, they are outlined by giant molecular clouds, and that's where the star formation is taking place. You will find that it is embedded in the neutral atomic hydrogen, which is in the disk of the galaxy, right? But if you look at the genes collapse, the genes length and the gene scale, which tells you what scale clouds will collapse to form stars, you will see that it works for star formation for densities and pressures and temperatures of the giant molecular clouds and the molecular clouds, not for atomic hydrogen. Atomic hydrogen does not collapse to form stars.
Any other question? If you have question, please raise your hand.
I think it's time for the next talk then.
Our universe is full of mystery, and Professor Somak Raychaudhuri, director of IUCAA Pune, introduced us a very interesting topic, mystery of the galaxy near and far away from us. So we thank you, sir, once again for your kind presentation and information to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before leaving, sir, we want to have a photograph. So all the participants, please open your video and we will take a snapshot. Participants, please open your videos. I think we have two. So why few coming?
There is no grid view here.
Oh,
You have to go to grid view, change layout,
yes.
tiled view, and the number of tiles, the maximum I can do is 49.
Oh,
So you'll have to take 2 shots.
okay.
Only this much.
So, Sagar, please. $16, you increase it. 30, 44. Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, sir, it's done. We have taken this.
Your,
Thanks.
we have 49 now. Open your video. Some of you are not.
Thank you.
Sagar, is it done? Take one more. Take one more shot. So we have another, no? We will have another speaker. Yeah, no, another solution.
No,
No,
all will not come. They will not come.
Only for the next one.
No.
Okay. So thank you, sir. Thank you, participants, for your kind presence. So we will move to the next talk. So when the pandemic will over, we will have speakers like eminent speaker Professor Somok Raichaudhuri to visit our place once again.
We're very happy to visit. I'm waiting for the next opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
So next speaker, Professor Konuk Saha from IUCAA, Pune. So Professor Konuk Saha, he is based from Calcutta, MSc from Banaras Hindu University, and PhD from IISc Bangalore. So he did many of his research work in foreign countries, and his primary research is focused on galaxies, their structures, formation, and evolution. Spiral structure in these galaxies are modeled, and initially when he returned to India, he before joining as a faculty, he was a postdoc at IUCAA and a long-term visitors at different institutes, and then in the international area like Geneva Observatory, Geneva, MPA Munich, and then ASIAA and TIARA Taipei, also Raman Research Institute Bangalore, and STSCI Baltimore. And he had a lot of research interest and published a number of papers in national and international journals with high impact factor. So I request Professor Saha Please deliver your.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, screen is visible now.
Is visible?
Yes.
Because I cannot see anything.
Oh, now visible.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a way to do full screen here? Because I'm not used to Google.
Post.
Full
Oh yes. Now I will request Professor M.M. Verma from Lucknow University. Professor M.M. Verma from Lucknow University to chair the session. Professor Verma.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas. I'll be happy to do that. In fact, it was really amazing to listen to Professor Somak's lecture, full with the amazement, while we keep our feet tied to the small planet called Earth and hold our heads high into the wonderful galaxies and all that. So it's another lecture now by Professor Kanak Saha, who would be talking about the detection of this extreme ultraviolet galaxy that was made possible with the help of AstroSat. And as everyone knows, the AstroSat has been really very crucial for all of us. The level of the spatial resolution and all kind of the background noise suppression, even compared with the Hubble Space Telescope, has been really remarkable. So it has been wonderful tribute to the Indian scientists to have discovered it within a period of say 5 years after the launch of the AstroSat in 2015. Professors from various countries. As far as I can recall, they had scientists from Switzerland, France, and this Japan, and the USA, the Netherlands, and many other countries like that. So it's been really very nice to see as to how the dark universe has exposed itself and exposing to the wonders, and so that we can comprehend all the signals now today that came to us from the far reaches of the universe, having traveled long distances of say 9.3 billion light years immediately after this, the reionization and all that. So Professor Kanak Saha would be talking a lot about this and will add to our understanding about these wonders. So over to Professor Kanak Saha.
Thank you very much. Many thanks to the organizer for inviting me. It would have been really nice to see you in person, but so is life now. Also, thanks to Professor Raichaudhuri for actually creating the base for giving a wonderful talk on galaxies. So this makes my life easy. So I will consider now you like sort of all the audience, if the students are there, so that they are already familiar with galaxies, so that I don't get into the galaxies anymore. I just wanted to ask, and also like thanks to Professor Burma for kind introduction. So before I start, I just wanted to ask is my screen full visible? Because I do not understand this part actually. I'm seeing.
Kanak, we can see your whole keynote, but not in presentation mode. You have to go to. Now it's all right. Now it's absolutely fine. Keep to this one. This is fine.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm going to tell you about what AstroSat, what we did with AstroSat, and in particular the ultraviolet imaging telescope, which is on board the satellite. So the part of this, the work that I'm going to talk today is is a detection of a extreme UV light and from a distant galaxy. So it has the concern concerning the early universe. In particular, there is a direct connection to the epoch of reionization, and I'm going to take you through very briefly to the phases of the universe that is important and that is relevant for this. And this is our universe at a glance. Okay, on this axis, this is a schematic diagram as the redshift. Redshift 0 is where we are, and its redshift, like now, in principle, goes to infinity, where the start of the universe was the Big Bang, right? So in this, as you know, like when the universe started from hot Big Bang, it was mostly hot soup of charged particles, and as the universe sort of expanded, it cools down very fast, and these ions and the electrons start combining, and that's when this process, when it stopped, when all of these sort of ions and electrons principle have sort of combined, we have only the neutral gas, and this is the time when the universe was just 400,000 years old, okay, compared to what we are 13.8 billion years old. Okay, and that's when the redshift around 1100, when the universe had this recombination, just the recombination just completed. And when, since you have a neutral gas, suddenly there are no light, so universe went through a phase called the dark age. There were no stars, no galaxies at all, right? And so as you know, that the universe constantly expanding, and it's cooled down, and but that at that time, what Professor Raichoudhury had shown is that in his talk there were this dark matter, the dark matter starts clumping together. So they make sort of started collapsing because of the gravitational instability and forming mini halos. Mini halos in which the gas started falling in. Okay, and that starts falling in, they sort of ignite, and that's how the first stars and the first galaxies form. Probably we do not know yet. There is no observational evidence, but we think that they must be very metal poor. Okay, which means because when this recombination happened, we have mostly dominated by hydrogen gas, and there are very little helium and lithium coming from the Big Bang nuclear synthesis, right? So this metal-free gas, almost metal-free gas, what stars they would make is basically called the pop-3 stars. They are very short-lived. Okay, so if you looked at your stellar evolution studies, in which it tells you the more massive it is, shorter it lives, right? And so these stars quickly explode, and from this extreme UV light comes up. And remember, when the stars are very massive, they are also very hot when they form, and the dominant part of the black body shifted towards the UV. Okay? So the UV basically below wavelength of 3000 angstrom. Okay, so these early stars and galaxies were the sources of this copious amounts of UV photons and extreme UV photons, and when they came out, there were also, imagine the sea of hydrogen gas, so that they would try to sort of ionize the hydrogen atom again. Those UV light become with the UV light whose energy is greater than 13.6 electron volt. They would be enough to break a hydrogen atom, which were from the recombination. They would be ionized again. So that's why, and more such this first stars and galaxies form, and then more the sea of hydrogen will be ionized, and that's how the light will pass through. And this is also like called the start of the reionization of the universe. And today, our universe is mostly in this phase, the fully ionized phase. And so that there are various questions to this. For example, what are the properties of those galaxies, like which the first galaxies which caused this reionization of the universe? Okay. How were the spectrum of these first stars, right? So and then how did this reionization happen? What is the kind of the topology? Various there are many questions which are actually very important, and is right now is kind of very active. Okay? And we, as you know, the universe is around 1 billion years old, or around redshift 6. This process of reionization is completed, and so we are very much interested in this to understand what caused this reionization, like what kind of galaxies and what are their properties, what do we know about this. So so as I said, this first this galaxies were a very the useful source of this UV photons, which is greater than 13.6 electron volt with energy. They are locally it's very difficult to find them, because they easily get absorbed by the hydrogen gas within the galaxy itself. Okay? So the amount of photons, the high energy photons that escape the galaxy, they are generally small. Okay, because this has the generally UV photons are getting used to within the interstellar medium of the galaxy itself, be it the first galaxy or be the galaxy now. Okay, so but some do manage to escape, and that's where the importance of the ASTROSAT, and also I'm going to talk about. But before I go through, I'll try to motivate you a bit more that these UV photons that I said that they will come out of the galaxy, okay, they are also going to suppress the star formation that is happening elsewhere in the mini halos. Okay, so because these UV photons are remember the stars don't form just not only from the hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas has to collapse, cool down, and form molecular gas, and from molecular gas further collapse, and then you have the star formation. Okay. So if you shine the UV photons, highly energetic UV photons on this molecular gas, they would definitely cause damage to the molecular gas, will break this molecular gas, and it will be difficult. The star formation will be suppressed. So the idea that we ask this question, that can we catch these sources which cause this reionization. So then there will be even broader sense, because this is very important for the cosmological simulation and the structure formation or the galaxy formation in general. Can we constrain the UV background, that these photons that came out, what is the gross budget of these photons came out? And in terms of a number, we estimate what is called the escape fraction, means the amount of the photons, the energy, the photons with greater than 13.6 electron volt, that kind of photons, how many of those photons are produced in the galaxy, and how much of them are escaped. The ratio of these two is called the escape fraction, and this is a parameter of utmost interest at the present moment, and this field is over only the last 4 or 5 years have grown tremendously, and is in the very growing phase in one of the fastest growing domain in the astronomy. Now, as I explained to you, that this high energy, the UV photons with greater than 13.6 electron volt are very difficult for them to escape the ISM interstellar medium. So there has been models which try to explain how can actually these UV photons escape the galaxy. So imagine like this is the strongest sphere where the stars are forming, surrounding that this like H2, and then you have a neutral hydrogen gas shell around it, and so to escape once these UV photons come out of it, as I said, that they will be absorbed by the neutral hydrogen gas. But if there are holes in the interstellar medium around the strongest sphere, then they may escape the interstellar medium and come out of the galaxy. And there is this extreme case when the star formation is so strong that the strongest sphere is actually incomplete, so they don't form, and that also leads to the escape of the UV photons. Now, so far we're talking about the interstellar medium. So even if these photons like escape the interstellar medium of the galaxy, often the galaxy has circumgalactic medium, means there are the material which is around the galaxy. So the photons may get absorbed in the circumgalactic medium as well. So naturally you can see there will be further reduction of the photons, right? And then once this manage to escape the ISM and the CGM, the circumgalactic medium, there is the huge path length between you and the satellite and the galaxy. Okay, it's called the intergalactic medium, and these photons will be absorbed in the intergalactic medium also. So at the end, the chances that you get photons discovered or detected on your satellite or in your telescope detector is very, very minuscule. The probability is very low. And this is where is also like shown that this is the transmission probability of the intergalactic medium as a function of wavelength. And you can see that by the time it goes to the redshift 6, when exactly the report of reionization stopped and we want to go farther, like beyond redshift 6, the probability that you will see this photons is like very close to 0, which means that's why the directly observing these escaping photons from high redshift galaxies beyond redshift 6 is next to impossible. Okay, but searches are on, and then we are looking for different probabilities, different ways to look around this problem. So currently there are so when I said that this the probability is very low in the low redshift, but if you look at the high redshift, which is low redshift, which is like redshift 2 and below, like around 1 to 2 and even below, then the transmission probability is still higher, but it's still a probability that you may get these photons escape. There must be some magic here. So recently this bunch of galaxies which looks like, of course, nothing what Professor Roy Choudhury has shown, but these are called the compact local starburst galaxies, known by the name of green peas. Okay, the green color, and then blueberries. Okay, there's some fruity names. These are fortunately came in the last 4 or 5 years, and it seems this high energy the photons seem to escape these galaxies. Okay? And there is a spectrum of this galaxy. These galaxies are emitting very high oxygen 3 line, which is the doubly ionized oxygen line. And although there are starbursts, we can see you would expect the very high the hydrogen alpha line, which is the 6563 angstrom in the rest frame. And but in this for these galaxies are characterized by actually a very high oxygen 3 or the doubly ionized oxygen line, and there is a the companion to that is oxygen 2, which is 3727 angstrom, and this ratio of the oxygen 3 and oxygen 2 are supposed to be very high. So a lot of galaxies have been selected based on this ratio, which is oxygen 3 over oxygen 2 greater than around 10-ish. And this was the picture came. And this is where it's showing that this is the redshift from 0 to all the way up to 3.5. And this is the observed fraction of the flux in the Lyman continuum. I will explain that. And versus the non-ionizing versus the non-ionizing photon flux. So these are the galaxies are basically these green peas and the blueberry galaxies. Okay? And these are observed with the HST cosmic origin spectrograph, and they found that these galaxies are actually emitting this high energy UV photons. There are also some bunch of galaxies are being observed using Keck, one of the 10-meter class telescope, and with a dedicated time, they have found also like similar such galaxies in redshift around 3-ish. This entire redshift range from around 0.4 to around 3-ish to 0.7 are known as basically desert for this Lyman continuum leakers in this. And there are no observations like before Astrophysics. So how do we search for these objects? Like what do we do to proceed? It seems the best way to go is look for like deep field. But before that, I'm going to explain what do you mean by this Lyman continuum leakers or this extreme UV light that I'm talking about. So basically, extreme UV light means all the light which wavelength is less than 912 angstrom. Okay, so if you take an image of a sky, part of the sky, which is basically where you do photometry, and you do it basically you measure you take the image in certain pass band, which is, let's say, for astrosat in far ultraviolet is 1300 angstrom to 1800 angstrom. Is the bluer side and the redder side wavelength. So if you catch a galaxy whose wavelength is all the way below 912 and which is within this, okay, so then they will be considered as a Lyman continuum leaking galaxy. So if you have a redshift Z, then the Lyman limit, which is like, for example, the redder side is basically 1 plus Z times 912. So if Z is, let's say, 1.4, which I'm going to talk about, then the Lyman limit is 2207 angstrom. So which means it will be somewhere like beyond lambda 2, which is 1800 angstrom, which means object, then all the light will be below below 900, sorry, below the Lyman limit, and then this will be considered as a Lyman continuum leakers. I hope on line 7 it shows that any galaxy or any object that is at redshift 0.97 greater than 0.97 will be considered as a Lyman continuum leakers if it is detected using in the far ultraviolet filter of astrosat. So the way to go forward to this is basically to create a deep image or called the deep field. Okay, a typical deep field is such that in which there should not be any bright star to contaminate the light in this patch of the sky. And this is an example of the Hubble deep field, which is in the southern hemisphere. And the contribution of the Hubble is, of course, the amazing, because it has allowed us to look into the past and the faint and the farthest galaxies in the universe so far in the optical and infrared light. So it's kind of revolutionized our way of understanding the very early galaxy formation and the understanding of the early galaxies. So in some sense, this is a window to look into our past. Okay, so there are many other reasons why study the field, but I'll not get into much here. But I think many of you would be familiar with the luminosity function of galaxies. This is the kind of observed luminosity function of galaxies. What you do is basically the phi, the function of L, which is there's a the power law term and then the exponentially decay term beyond like the L star, which is around a Milky Way like galaxy. Beyond the Milky Way mass kind of galaxies, we have very little, not much of massive galaxy. Okay, so which means if you go look deeper and deeper, or if you have a very high signal to noise ratio, you can actually look fainter and fainter objects in the sky. So which means which is also which means that there is a lot of scope to understand the faint galaxies, and probably there are a lot of unknown discoveries remain. Okay, and another thing is that if we do the UV deep field using AstroSat, it actually probes a very nicely a redshift range around 1 to 2, which you've seen in the previous lecture by Professor Rajudari, and this is where the peak of the star formation history, the cosmic star formation history. And this part of the redshift were inaccessible with this depth that we are talking about, are going to like say in the later slide. It's like AstroSat has nicely complemented the entire astronomy community in this wavelength range. So it's a nice way to also look at the ionizing sources in this. And the deep field is not only that, like as I said, like deep field is like redshift 11.1. This is the currently I think the furthest. If I'm not wrong, maybe there is another one. And these are seen in infrared light, redshift 10.77, redshift 7. So by this time, when you look at the galaxies, they don't look at like just galaxies. Normally, like in a pixelated images basically. Then they are not visually impressive, but for astronomers, the signal is the most important over the noise. And by the time you come to a bit lower redshift, which is redshift 1.6, around 2, you can start seeing the morphology of the galaxy also different. Like there are clumps in the galaxy, several clumps, and as you go to lower and lower redshift, they get more matured and then more much bigger, and there are various morphology cleanly you can see. Okay, so this is a part of the thing. There's some part of a bit of intrinsic that the galaxies we do not know what they kind of they may not have matured enough to have formed like a spirally shape or very nice these galaxies, and also the part of the problem is that our resolution is still not enough, because we need a very high resolution to look into the details of that, and that has to be overcome. So deep field is all of these are actually example from the deep field. So deep field is a very key to look into the details of the galaxy properties, galaxy formation. So I quickly go through the making of the AstroSat UV deep field that I did here. So I looked at like the the different part of the covering the Chandra deep field south in the southern hemisphere. Then these are the two field of view in which AstroSat observed. Okay, we observed in the two filters, one in far ultraviolet and near ultraviolet. Okay? And here are the wavelength. In the far ultraviolet, the mean lambda mean is around 1540 angstrom, and in the near ultraviolet, the mean wavelength is around 2400 angstrom. And the far ultraviolet radiation, if you see in the rest frame, so they are generally dominated by the massive OB stars, whose lifetime is generally around 100-ish mega a year. Now, very short-lived star which emit a lot of UV photons. Okay, so when we see far ultraviolet emission from a galaxy, to a large extent, we can be sure that they are coming from the very highly star-forming, the massive OB stars. Okay. So we took about 100 kiloseconds of observation, which is around I think 28 hours of AstroSat the data, and this is how it looks like. Very unimpressive in one field of view. This image is a full field of view of the AstroSat, and you can hardly see anything. But this is only 1500 second image. In the next, as it goes in the orbit, it takes like a different snapshot at different times, and we go orbit by orbit. Okay, so in the next orbit, the same object if I have marked in green here, will be appear in red, or if somewhere else, if you see my cursor, it's like will be in different places. So, which means that there are, because of the satellite, the motion, these are kind of like a little bit shifted. So what we do is basically consider this as a reference, and then we say that like this green should fall to the red. This is, so we make shift and rotation algorithm and stack them. When you stack them, you see a very kind of deep image in near ultraviolet, although it may not be impressive for you, but for us it's like quite impressive because we can see many faint points, like the is in still in negative, so the black is like the brighter, okay, brighter, and yeah, the white is like the faintest, okay, but you can see many small structures. Okay, so we combine these two as we showed in the image, like in the planning, and this part gets like the double of the exposure of the two. And this is what it looks like in one orbit image. If you take one astrosat orbit, this looks like that. Very noisy, like looks like very unimpressive. And this is in near ultraviolet, because in far ultraviolet the photons are also very low. Okay, the photon flux that comes to your detector is very low. And we did the astrometry using, which was very much required to know the position of each of these object. Like imagine this as an object, this is an object. Okay, we should know the exact location of that compared to the with respect to the HST. So we reach a very good accuracy, astrometric accuracy, about 1 pixel of astrosat. So you can see superimposed on that our astrosat image, and you see that it exactly appears in the same place. This is one image from the HST, and this is the astrosat. So it's like kind of very good. And this is what it looks like, kind of a zoom in view. You can see like many objects here. Okay. You can go faint, and I come to this image in a minute. And this is the Hubble extreme deep field in 4-color image, 2 astrosat filter and 2 HST. And this is what it looks like. If you zoom in, you can see the blue and the cyan. The dark blue and the cyan are from astrosat, and the red and the green are from HST. So I combined them together using a different image processing techniques, and you can see there are many faint objects. If you can see like several places, you can see. So these are the important addition that astrosat is making. So with astrosat, we can actually now detect half a magnitude fainter object than HST can do in the same wavelength range. Okay, so that's the current state of the art at the moment with astrosat. Of course, this is improving even more, and there is a clear detection. So there are many science one can do with this. For example, the UV luminosity function. What is the slope? What is how do we constrain the slope of the UV part? The improving star forming activities, and then the morphology of the galaxies, the clumpy, because in the UV it becomes clumpy. Then we looked at the star forming dwarf galaxies, particularly and then the important part that we are talking, the subject matter of this is the hunting the reionization sources, obviously. So the first detection we had at redshift 1.42. This paper appeared in Nature Astronomy and also a Nature News article. If someone is interested, should look at this, very nicely summarizing the current state of the art, and also explains why HST, what was HST doing for this. Then you can see that escaping photons finally arrested, which means people in the HST, with the HST community, have been looking for this kind of detection for quite some time. I know there are several HST programs in this context. So this is how the astrosat image looks like. If I zoom in some part, you cannot believe it made like some throwaway basically this image, because this is really like a pixelated noisy image. And if I zoom in here, this is how it looks like, one of the detection of this galaxy in far ultraviolet, and this is what is in near ultraviolet. And when we measure the signal to noise within this PSF, which is the point spread function of the astrosat in FUV filter, which is we get a signal to noise around 3.2, which is barely about 3 sigma detection. These galaxies were chosen from around 1517 galaxies. For that, we had spectroscopic redshift, and we needed H alpha, oxygen 3, H beta to measure the dust in the galaxies and other star forming properties. And from there, we basically got when simultaneous presence of these spectral lines should be present in this galaxies. So this further the downsizing, and at the end we end up with a 38 galaxies in the Hubble extreme deep field, which we searched through properly and found only 2 galaxies with signal to noise greater than 3, and one of them is this one that we're going to talk about. So these galaxies looks like this. It's like a clumpy galaxy, 1, 2, 3, 4 clumps here within that. Of course, in astrosat we cannot see the clump because the PSF is much bigger. So imagine like the entire PSF of this size only. And then, since it is a redshift 1.4, this is the first example of a clumpy galaxy emitting Lyman continuum photons. And as I have already explained, this redshift 1.4 is somewhere in the middle, and it's exactly probe the cosmic star formation history, and then this epoch. And then, just to give you an example, there are many other galaxies in the same redshift range, around redshift 1 to 2, are of this morphology. Okay? They are probably in their building stage, the forming stage, okay, assembling like the clumps together and forming galaxies. Okay? So this is a very important epoch, and with this will encourage astronomers to look now into like this redshift range and look for this target. Remember, so far the targets were only compact, these green peas and blueberry galaxies. So now it is open to clumpy galaxies. So we did quite a bit of like the studies, and I'm going to skip this. This is not important. We sort of one task that we had was that are these clumps 1, 2, 3, 4 are the same redshift? Do they belong to the galaxy? Many kind of this question. The similar question would come here as well. Anytime you see clumpy galaxy in this context, how do you know this clump actually belong to the galaxy? So what we did is basically we did the emission line mapping. We have the spectra from entire region here, and we extracted spectra from these 1, 2, 3, and 4 region, and all the region the spectra we measured the hydrogen alpha line, and we show that all the lines are basically consistent with redshift 1.4. So this probably proved. Okay, so all the clumps are in the same redshift. So now after astrosat, we have this so-called desert is filled with one galaxy as of now. So this becomes a continuity. And we did a lot of other studies. I think these are quite a bit of details here. So that these galaxies can be a low mass galaxy. It is similar to around the green pea galaxies, but it's a clumpy. These galaxies forming quite a high star formation at around 55 solar mass per year. And this is also around the metallicity of the galaxies around 0.004, around I think 1/5 of the solar metallicity, and if you take the mean stellar population age is around 100 mega year only. So we did quite a bit of other modeling of that spectral energy distribution. By the way, this is basically called the spectral energy distribution, where you see the F lambda, which is the flux in terms of like arcs per second per centimeter per angstrom, and versus the lambda in the rest frame of the galaxy. And this is the far ultraviolet filter. This is the near ultraviolet filter. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, and all of these are HST. And these are like Spitzer Space Telescope, and in between these 2 are from the ground-based telescope. Okay, all the filters. So these are basically called the spectral energy distribution, and we model this spectral energy distribution to understand the intrinsic, the model, the spectral energy distribution of the galaxy. It turns out that the normal, the spectral energy distribution modeling that we use are not able to explain the FUV far ultraviolet flux. So we needed sort of low column density of hydrogen gas in that to explain the far ultraviolet flux with a different the modeling, which is called the binary stellar population model. Okay. So what we calculated from here is that called the escape fraction that I have explained to you, which means the number of photons that are produced, which is the Lyman container photons, and that they manage to escape. So what we do is basically we use the standard case B recombination from the Osterbrook and the book. So this is in the book formula, the formula from the book. So it's very nice. So this gives you, if you know the H alpha luminosity, which you measure from the HST spectra, the number of photons that couldn't escape. Okay, and then from the astrosat we found the number of photons that escape. So we actually calculated the total number of photons from the astrosat flux, the 10 to the power 54 Lyman container photons that escape. So the escape fraction is basically the number that escape, that come to us to detector, and then the sum of these two, which means like which could not escape and which escape, which is basically the total number of photons, and these give a clean estimate of at least 0.2, which means that 20% of these Lyman container photons escape the galaxy. Okay. And then we do other method as well, and then we make even the distribution here. This is the distribution of the escape fraction, which says that at the end, what you should learn is that these galaxies that we found, the AUDF01, which is emitting at least 20% of the Lyman container photons to the intergalactic medium. And this is the kind of number that astronomers are expecting, because this is the kind of meets the budget to the full reionization of the early universe. So this has many the other important the implication. One of them, I think I did not explain. If you look at carefully, this is the color coded. The most of this detection here and on this side, low redshift and high redshift are at 900 angstrom, around 900 angstrom. This one you see the red spectrum wavelength around 600 angstrom, which means we are actually detecting 600 angstrom photons from a galaxy, which is for the first time. Okay, no one has seen from a distant galaxy that kind of photons. So now it's suddenly like these are the model spectra. From the theoretically, one can expect the model spectra, okay, of a galaxy. You see this the red spectrum wavelength from 200 all the way to up to 600. You see after 900, this is the Lyman break. Suddenly the flux drops, and then after that the flux increases. But which way to the increase? There is no constraint. There is no observation. So that's how this observation at 600 angstrom will put a constraint on the ionizing spectrum of the galaxy for the first time. And in other words, this will open up kind of the starting galaxies in the EUV, extreme UV domain. So we have found now around, we looked at like 509 galaxies, we found 13. This is already showing like it's quite rare. And Charlotte is like a PhD student in Geneva Observatory working with me and modeling these 13 galaxies now. And we have an amazing set of data. I have observed several other, the same field several times. And we are currently combining all the observations together. And in this part will be the astrosat ultra UV deep field. Means that this will be the only, I think the deepest astrosat UV deep field will be next several years, because most of the UV missions are in their planning stage, and this is the golden opportunity for the Indian astronomy community to take part and then to basically to see what interesting science can be done with this, because there's a enormous amount of like data, and this is a very precious in some sense because no one else has this. So these are kind of the team so far. This is like there are already growing people. So these are the people who contributed to the Nature Astronomy paper. and I think I'll thank you. And if there is any question, I would be happy to answer.
Yes, so if there are any questions, most welcome to ask Kanak. I think there is an option to switch on your microphone so that you can switch on the microphone and ask the question, or as an alternative, you can also write in the chat box so that the questions could be read out. In the meantime, can I ask the speaker one question, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so Kanak, I was just wondering as to what kind of constraints can be put on the Hubble parameter, by using the data that you have acquired at different redshifts? I mean, given the fact that the universe has also entered the accelerated phase,
Yes, yes.
and you are referring to Z like 1.42 or something.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about time when the universe entered the accelerated phase as well. And we have already had the supernova data, right, say from Z equal to say around 0.5 or something. So which tell a lot about from the light curves and all that. So I was wondering how these astrosat data could shed some light on this.
I'm trying to think. I'm not entirely sure where the Hubble parameter will enter in terms of on the UV light here.
No, I don't think the Hubble parameter, is there any constraint on the Hubble parameter here? That you're using the Hubble parameter to calculate the luminosities.
Yes, yes. So
that will be a circular argument. I don't think.
correct, correct. Because I think we cannot.
So it means that it's difficult to extract any direct information about the Hubble parameter, right? I mean,
Yes.
you're using already existing information about the Hubble parameter, and then you are putting into finding out the various luminosity distribution and all that about.
Yeah, so I think it could be, as Shumak is saying, that this will be a roundabout, but I don't know. If we use some spectral, but we don't have the astrosat data. We don't have. Even for the luminosity function, if we go the Painter slope, and we'll have always the Hubble parameter will go into this thing, constructing the luminosity. So
okay. And then how were you able to minimize the background noise compared to the Hubble Space Telescope?
Yeah, this is quite
because that must have been really a very remarkable thing to achieve, right?
Yes, yes. So so to go into the details, it seems the dark current in the detector is quite high in the corresponding detector that has been used in the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, compared to like this, so that there is a about a factor of 10 or so dark current. The dark current is like one source of the noise.
Okay.
In the detector, so that is like quite low in this. We also have suspect another thing is like maybe we have a bit of a larger pixel in the astrosat, so sort of this I think the graininess, the noise is like sort of minimized in some sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So and then of course, like the other thing, there is another interesting thing is that because the dark current is like high, no matter when they were observing for longer time, the temperature in the detector increases, and the dark current also contributes even more. So even if you observe for more and more time, it does not help.
Okay.
So that was, I think, one crucial difference between AstroSat UV-IT detector and the HST in the same wavelength range,
Right.
same detector, which is called the MAMA detector.
So I understand that there are some plans to improve upon this Astrosat also. Are they in the pipeline? Some plans to have another Astrosat, or maybe with some better
Not
resolution?
another AstroSat, but I think there are missions. So in the UV context, there is one in the pipeline. I mean, this is not yet how do you say, not yet got the green signal from the not yet funded from the ISRO, but in the planning stage and all. It's called the INSIST, led by Indian Institute of Astrophysics, and
I see.
we are kind of the participating institute. So that's a 1 meter UV mission.
1 meter.
1 meter UV mission is quite big, but this is yet to be funded fully by the ISRO.
Yes. Yeah. Please go ahead. You can switch on your microphone and ask the question.
Okay, Kanak,
Yes.
I have a query.
Yeah.
You are using Astrosat data
Yeah.
in the UV spectrum range, and you have Astrosat. Through Astrosat, you can peep deep into the sky, is not it?
Yes.
And as a result, you are getting a new things there.
Yes.
So this is one way of improving the observation. And is it giving any constraint on the dark matter, or it is same everywhere?
Yeah, I think these are bit of an indirectly probed, as I said. For example, I can only talk about where probably this dark matter thing would come into picture. Is probably through the faint and slope of the luminosity function, because the CDM, the cold dark matter model, has um, has a predicted faint and slope of the luminosity function, which is showed in the third slide. And then with the faint and slope of the galaxy luminosity function are at the moment unconstrained. Okay, with UVIT, since we can detect fainter objects, so we'll have with this is certainly a lot of improvement on top of Galax. If you remember, the Galax has a PSF which is about 3 or 4 times bigger than the Astrosat, which means if you observe one object in Galax in UV, you may see around 3 objects come together. Okay, so that is a process. So there is a factor of 2 to 3 improvement in the number of faint sources that will be detected using Astrosat, and particularly in the UV. So we can constrain the UV luminosity function and constrain the slope of the UV luminosity function, and that it has some effect on the uh, on the predicted the luminosity function, if that is available from, because nowadays cosmological simulation can do a lots of interesting thing. For example, they are not only producing galaxies, but they can also see galaxy in different light, convolve with different UV filters, optical filters, so they can do that. So we can certainly match this and try to constrain the luminosity function, and through which we can comment or the constraint the cold dark matter model is gone into the cosmological simulation. but not for individual galaxies.
Okay, thank you.
So are there any more questions? It has been really a very nice talk. In fact, we all must be thankful to the Indian scientists, especially at IUCAA, who involved themselves with this kind of a fantastic detection of light from the earliest eras of the universe. So by itself, it's a very challenging thing. In fact, it's quite thrilling even to believe it. Appears to be like a fiction, science fiction. And we, the scientists, are mostly like the detectives in fact, trying to get some circumstantial evidences or information about the past with whatever we have, whatever we can achieve today. Signals are traveling all the way from the past to us at the present. So we as the observers are really lucky enough to have got those signals and to also have the equal level of understanding of our mind so that we could sagaciously analyze those signals and be able to conclude something. So it appears like one part of the universe is now mature enough to observe another part of the universe, or we are looking at our own past. So it's a very interesting thing to understand. And thanks to Dr. Kanak Saha and his team, they deserve a huge round of congratulations. In fact, all the IUCAA people who have been involved with this kind of discovery. We wish them many more success stories. And if there are no further questions, I think we can end this session, pre-lunch session, and then we'll meet again after lunch. Thank you, Professor Somakrai Chaudhary and Kanak Saha,
Thank you very much.
who have been present, and all of you for coming. Over to Vikas now. I think he can furnish further information about it.
Thank you, Professor Verma, for chairing this session. And we are now lunch break. It will be up to 2:30 p.m. So we will assemble here for contributory talk at 2:30 p.m. It will go till 4:30 p.m. So thank you all again.
Okay.